Hey guys, Mustached Tom here to review A Quiet Place Day 1. So I've seen the trailer for this movie, I want to say 2 times about, and then I went to go see the movie, and after watching it I was sort of backtracking and trying to think about what I thought of the previous two movies, that being A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place Part 2. So, from what I can recall from both of those movies, is that, at least initially, in terms of the first movie, it was quite refreshing to see a movie try to uptake this new type of gimmick, that me being primarily focusing on sound, or lack thereof, in terms of how to mix that in with the horror of these creatures. That was quite unique. And after the movie had came out and after some time, reviewers started coming out and exposing potential criticisms of the movie, and I thought of those very same criticisms. One of the ones that I caught wind of was like, there's a scene in the movie where they head to this waterfall and they're able to talk to each other there because of the sound of the running water sort of blocks out their noise. And a lot of people were like, well, why don't they just live out there? And there were a few things I had thought of, like how far away was that from their house? Would that mean that they would have to become sort of outdoorsy type of people? You know, things of that nature were definitely questions that were left lingering. Because those are things I don't necessarily think the critics had thought of, per se, perchance. I don't know. Those are just some lingering questions I had thought of. The sort of comfort of knowing where everything is in your house, and versus again outdoors and in the forest. Anyway, in the sequel, they deal with how to get rid of the creatures and, the rarity of how they figure that out, but whatever. Anyway, focusing on this movie, A Quiet Place Day 1, and after seeing it, and thinking about this as sort of a trilogy, an out of order one, but still a trilogy nonetheless, I think that this would have served better as a long running series rather than a set of 3 movies, at least currently speaking. And the reason I suggest that is because as we progress through this story, there are quite a number of events that happen in this movie in particular that seem to utilize the quick pacing of the outer world in such a way that seems so unbelievable versus, quite interesting characters, or at least one of them being our main character. Speaking of, she is, I believe her name was Sam, if I remember correctly. Point being is that she is an older woman dealing with. She lives in an elder caretaking place, and she's essentially living out her last days, essentially. And I thought about that, and I was thinking, like, that isn't typically a character archetype you get a lot in movies in general, is it? So it was quite a unique perspective to see that main character come from. We see that she is rather persistent in rather this, what we would consider this sort of simplistic goal, that being she wants pizza. And that remains pretty persistent throughout the movie. As they are indeed even heading out, she, after giving the caretaker some gruff about like how the area she's in and the people she's with are shit, she was lied to, and they are instead dragged off to this marionette or puppet show. So we go and we see her head outside and again insist on that pizza. However, we get our text message, or the guy mentions how they need to leave because something is already happening. And on their way back, while they're on the bus, we see the meteors begin to fall here. One crashes nearby, which causes this cloud of ash to surround the area. And as she awakes and makes her way out, we see people getting dragged off. And we hear some fighting back in the distance or whatever. But eventually she does get knocked into the window. Now, this is where, again, the pacing comes into question. When she wakes up, she's already quickly silenced, which means from the time whenever she was in that cloud to whenever she wakes up, people have already figured out that these creatures are based on sound, which is a X amount of question mark. It's left ambiguous, which I find baffling. To me, and none of the other movies answer how they figured out how these creatures are based on sound alone. So again, remember, this movie's called Day One. You would suspect that we would learn, perhaps, how people would come to understand how these creatures operate and how they must operate in response to that. But no, we skip that. And I'm asking myself, why? Why would you skip such vital information that a prequel ought to present? And again, rather, a series could also present in a meaningful way. You could have even more characters and, more interactions with these creatures and figuring out how they function. At any rate, so we see her back up. We see the helicopter from above, and how we see the creatures follow where the helicopter is heading. And we know that she also has this cat. Now, the cat only makes one noise in this entire movie, and it's at this point in the movie. Outside of this moment, that cat suddenly becomes a ninja cat. I kid you not. So it makes noise, which allows the creatures to start to break in. And the noise from outside causes the caretaker to be pulled away. On top of that, but at some point she does clean up from the ash. I don't know if that was before or after. I think it was before. And so we see her head toward like the roof. Or no, we see her head towards this guy who says who writes out that they need to avoid bridges. Because again, the movie, outside of what's happening with these characters, the pacing is just blitzing. And I want to explain pacing for those unfamiliar at this point. To those who may be familiar, or unfamiliar rather, or new to, if you want to be a future reviewer. So pacing is probably one of the harder things to describe in terms of how to deal with it, how to, make sure pacing is good. These things are definitely among the harder things to figure out. So I decided to give two examples of pacing to show you two very different dynamics versus how this movie handles pacing. So I think these two examples are two good extremes of explaining or exploring what pacing is. So for example, we have a show called Has Been Hotel, a YouTube show. Well, he was picked up, but I digress. Anyway, point being is that a lot of people complained that the pacing of the show was too quick. So what that would mean is that there would be too many events happening, too many characters doing things, etc., etc. So pacing is determining speed versus, how much time you actually have, is a way I would describe it as best as possible. And my, counter to Has Been Told Tell is, while the pacing is technically fast, that is true, my counter argument would be that the amount of information we get relative to the pacing is so good. There is so much information we are fed in such a short period of time. That, to me, is how you utilize quick pacing in a very, very good way. So let me give you another example. Now, I've only heard about the show, and I've seen clips of the show, so I think I know how it operates, that being the show Ahsoka. This show has a complete opposite problem from what I've seen, that being the pacing is too slow. This means that there's, we have a long show, or, we have, every episode's like close up to an hour or something, rather. And there's so many spaces and gaps of time where nothing is happening, or, lack of, actions or events or people actually talking is happening. This is bad. This shows a lack of writing, a lack of creativity. This shows quite a disregard to a lot of things in response to that said pacing. So with this movie, in particular, and going back to pacing, the way I would describe this movie's pacing is that the character's pacing is fine. The world's pacing is blitzing ahead of the characters. And there is a scene in this movie where that completely breaks. And I'll get to that in just a bit here, but I want to get back to sort of the events of the movie. So, again, they were told to avoid bridges, which again, okay. So again, the noise from outside is carrying them outside, blah blah blah. So they go to the roofs to see that the helicopters begin to nuke off the bridges. And again, the pacing of the world is once again showing, like, how quick from when they landed to this decision being made is baffling to me. It's like, man, like, how fast did the military learn about this? How fast did they respond? How fast did they get up there? How fast did they make that decision? How fast, did they actually carry it out? And, like, how fast did they learn other pieces of information that we see that they learned? Again, blitzing this information, where it's like, if we, again, this would have worked better as a season for me. And I think one thing that this movie, or season, would definitely need is cutaways and perspectives of the military. Because we need to fucking know what they are seeing versus what we are seeing in this movie. Because, again, the timeline is just crazy right now. Anyway. No, her caretaker was still alive, sorry. They go to this other building where this, like, device goes off, and this is where he's killed, actually. And afterwards, she, like, heads outside, gets some basic equipment, is sort of on her own, gets food container for her cat, which becomes Ninja Cat at this point, and finds these two younger people, well, this young girl and either her older brother or father, I'm not sure which, are hiding out under this little, like, a little water spring. So she offers them food. And this is where we learn, because again, the military blitzing information is key, we learn that the creatures cannot swim. How did they find that out? Again, more questions that are just popping in that this movie ought to be answering, but nope, fuck that, I guess. So she moves them along, you know, and they get like pinned down by this other creature for a bit, but they eventually are able to leave. And this is the scene where they join this drove of people, and I mean drove of people, like hundreds, like seriously hundreds of people, like all walking toward the water. And she tells the two people, the young girl and the slightly older guy, to join that group ahead, so they do so. Meanwhile, she heads in the opposing direction. Now this is where things get baffling to me, because as she's proceeding forth, we begin to see from her perspective, we see people walking ahead making quite a bit of noise. And it's like, okay, we were already established that people somehow already figured out that making noise is really, really bad. So you would think that there would be other people who would look at those people and be like, no, 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 like, let me help you avoid making that noise however possible, right? But that doesn't happen in this scene, because they need another, like, action or dramatic scene, I guess, and, like, pulling it off here just seemed impossible, or whatever. But she's, like, in the mid-crowd, heading opposed to everyone else's direction, and, you know, enough noise is made where the creatures start attacking this group, and she's like in the middle of this attack, and she eventually like hides under a car. She's like dragged by this other guy almost, and then like she needs to get out of from underneath the car. But it's definitely a scene that is composed, or the way it's built up just doesn't, like, the building blocks of it aren't necessarily well handled either. And again, that remains consistent throughout. So again, she heads out of the way. She heads into like this alley after the fact. Then we cut to our other character, this man on the right of the poster there. His name is Eric. He was like in this water, and where he comes from is unknown. But we see the cat, the ninja cat, find him, and the cat returns to her, and he's following the cat, so he ends up cross-encountering with her. And he sort of just begins to follow her for some reason. The movie has a lot of silence, so we never really figure out for a while why he's doing this. So during the rain, because that's a thing that happens, and it rains rather heavily, so they figure, since it's raining quite heavily, that they can have an opportunity to speak, because the rain is already carrying noise like everywhere, so the creatures are like probably like confused at this point. So yeah, they are able to talk in this moment. This is where they learn they learn his name. And eventually, she's trying to push him away, essentially, but he's like insisting on staying. So they make their way to her place. And during this storm, they have themselves a little emotional scream, which I do like this scene, quite frankly. I think this is one of the better scenes in the movie, because, you know, there was so much going on, and there was so little time to actually, like, let out such emotions, and, you know, those emotions, of course, would make noise, and, you know, well, that would be that, right? So I'm glad that there would be a scene in this, as contrived as it may come across, to really depict that, they needed a moment. They really needed just a moment to just let everything out. And, I think it was a good scene. So yeah, they're screaming just due to the circumstances that they are in, essentially. Um, Now, she imposes her little, thing on him about wanting the pizza, so he's like, okay, I guess I can help with that or whatever. So he kind of wants in on it, I guess, because he's got nothing, we learn, or not much going on in his life, we learn. So she gets up first, he eventually gets up as well. You know, and she accidentally makes some noise, which allows us to see the creatures coming in. This is where they head into this like spinning doorway, and then they get like entrapped inside this building where like the creatures are encroaching. And the creatures are like descending downward from above. So eventually they make their way to the subway, and he's like throwing Bix behind them to like make the creatures like aim for those things behind them. But there are other creatures that are also nearby where they are too. So not quite the perfect system, but better than being swarmed, I guess. Anyway, they head into the sewer system, and they, stumble past this slumbering creature and move on. So they end up in the water, and I'm assuming it's really cold water. Eric, we can see, is trying hard, but he begins to breathe heavily, which is what causes the creatures to wake up. But again, we already know that the creatures cannot swim, so the creature drowns in trying to chase them out. So she's struggling a bit too in this section, so he helps her out at the end of it. And they end up in this church area. And he's like checking if she's okay. She's like dealing with withdrawal from this patch thing that she needs. So he heads out alone to get a new one. And again, the cat's sort of lingering about. And he heads out alone as she's sort of, staying behind in an area. So now that he's got to deal with the creatures, and we see a little bit how they operate. At the very minimum, we get to see how they feast on things. He grabs the cat, the ninja cat, and manages to also pick up this patch that she needs. And, at some point when he returns, she begins to explain why she wants this pizza, about like how her dad used to get it or something along those lines. And he's like, okay. So they head inside, or he heads outside for a bit, and indeed opens or gets this other pizza, because they enter like the pizza place that she was recommended or had gone to, and it's like all crushed down. So he goes to this other pizza place and gets pizza, gives it to her, and they enjoyed some what seems like, again, the acting seems to imply, rather cold pizza, or like staler pizza anyway. So he insists on doing some entertainment. This is another scene pretty late in the session, or the movie, to keep morale up, I guess. He does a little bit of silent magic with cards. Afterwards, they see the boat beginning to leave. So they're like, okay, we can, travel there. And we see the creatures like lingering on the shore as the boat's, puffing and making all that noise, but the creatures obviously, well, we already know they can't swim now. So the two of them are sneaking closer and closer to there, and they start making some noise, and the people on the boat hear from all the way wherever they are. So like, hey, stop the boat, because clearly there's still people there making noise. So and the creatures are responding to that as such. So let's stop the boat, make sure that these people can essentially get on. So she causes the distraction, which allows him to get closer and closer to the dock. Unfortunately, he makes some noise on his way. He trips and falls on his travels with the cat in hand, but he makes it. He dives off into the water as the creatures barely just miss him. So he's in the water, holding on dearly to that cat. He swims off to where the boat is. She stays behind, as sort of the inclination of the majority of the beginning of the movie was telling us, yeah, she kind of knows, her days are, she doesn't likely have that long left. So she figures, might as well save this other guy in the process, right? So he gets saved via the boat, and he's very thankful, obviously. And yeah, the movie essentially just ends with him being rescued and her staying behind. And that was A Quiet Place Day 1. And again, I do like these characters. Simplistic, which is already saying a lot more to them than most horror characters in recent history, to be fair. I mean, typically we just get the assholes you want to see die. But it's no. They have stuff going on. It's okay. And again, I think the issues of this movie are more pertaining to the world of it. How the world is operating and learning from how these creatures are interacting with it, and the pacing in which that is being handled in. Again, with it being a day one situation, how fast, again, is this military learning about this information? How did they come across one? How did they learn they can't swim? How did they figure to blow up the bridges? All of these things. And again, I think all of that could be solved by having a longer standing season. And again, following these different groups of people. Maybe we have, these two as one group. We can have the family from the first two movies. I think they're in both part 1 and 2, if I remember correctly. We can have both of those, groups, and I would definitely add a military group for us to see how the military specifically is dealing with this scenario, how they are learning this information, how are they making these decisions, when are they making the decisions, how are they learning how these creatures operate. All of these questions are left unanswered, that I think that a season's worth where they are introduced as a group can definitely be answered in a way more satisfying way. As is, I don't think I can give this movie higher than a 5 or 6 out of 10, and I probably honestly would lean a little bit closer to a 5 if I'm being honest. Again, a lot of this movie is just happening way too quickly. Again, the pacing of it, and what information we are just being fed just isn't enough. It's not enough. It's not Has-Been Hotel. It's not enough information that we are learning along the way. And, the movie does have its focus, though, to understand how all of this is interacting with her, our main character, that being, I think is important. Again, how we learn this information and all that. So that is my review of A Quiet Place Day 1. And if you ended up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. I want to head over to my petition to help out small YouTubers. Second to my PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly. And third to my Discord server, where you can join, collab, chill, all that cool stuff. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.